My name is Sam. I'm 34 years old and I've been driving taxis for about a decade now. I've seen all sorts of things, drunks, fights, even a proposal once. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what happened that night. I remember every detail like it was yesterday. And if you stick around to hear the end, you'll understand why I don't drive the night shift anymore. It was late, around 2 a.m., and I was heading back home after dropping off my last fare on a long, empty road out in the middle of nowhere. That's when I saw her. A woman standing on the side of the road covered in blood. My heart nearly stopped. You don't see something like that and not have every alarm bell in your head go off. But I couldn't just leave her there, could I? I pulled over, rolled down the window, and asked if she was okay. She told me she had been attacked in the woods and needed help. Her voice was shaky and she looked terrified. So of course I let her in. The ride started out quiet, tense. She sat in the back, breathing heavily, eyes darting around as if expecting something to jump out at any moment. I tried to keep calm, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The night seemed different, thicker somehow, like the darkness itself was closing in on us. Then I saw it. At first I thought it was a trick of the headlights, but no. There was something moving between the trees. A shadow. Big. Fast. I glanced at the rearview mirror, and the woman was staring straight ahead, her face pale. "It's following us," she whispered, her voice barely audible. My stomach dropped. I pressed harder on the gas, the car speeding down the road, but no matter how fast we went, I could feel it closing in on us. That's when I knew I wasn't just giving someone a ride. I was driving for my life. I kept my eyes on the road, knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel. My heart was pounding in my chest like it was trying to break free. The shadow was getting closer, and the woman, she was too calm. Way too calm for someone who'd just been attacked and was being chased by whatever that thing was. That's when it hit me. Something was wrong. Horribly wrong. I glanced in the rearview mirror again, and that's when I saw it. She wasn't scared anymore. In fact, she was smiling. My heart stopped. "What's going on?" I demanded, my voice shaking more than I'd like to admit. She leaned forward, her face darkening in the dim light of the car. "You see," she whispered, "I wasn't running from the creature. I am the creature." My blood ran cold. Before I could react, her eyes changed, glowing a deep, unnatural red. Her smile twisted into something sinister. "You've been feeding me," she said softly. "With your fear." As if reading my mind, she chuckled darkly. "But before I finish this, why don't you subscribe to this story? You might want to know what happens next, if you can survive long enough." My entire body froze in terror. I slammed the brakes, the car skidding to a halt in the middle of the deserted road. My heart raced, and for a second I thought about jumping out, running into the woods. But something told me it didn't matter. There was no escaping her. Before I could make a move, she lunged at me. Everything happened so fast. One moment she was sitting calmly in the back seat. The next, her claws were at my throat. I didn't even have time to scream. Pain seared through me, and everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on the side of the road, my taxi nowhere in sight. I don't know how I survived or if I really did. But if you're ever driving late at night and you see a woman covered in blood, don't stop. Keep driving no matter what. And if you made it this far, you should probably hit that subscribe button while you still can. My name is Tom, and I'm 36 years old. I've been driving a cab for over 10 years, and I thought I'd seen it all. But what I'm about to tell you is something I'll never forget. You see, most nights are quiet, routine. But there was this one night, one ride, that changed everything. And if you're wondering, yeah, I never made it back from that trip. Not really. It was late, maybe around midnight, and it had been raining nonstop. The kind of rain that makes the roads shine under the streetlights and every sound seems louder in the quiet streets. I had just dropped off my last passenger when I got a call to pick someone up in a part of town I didn't usually go to, way out in the suburbs. At first, nothing seemed off. The guy was just standing there waiting in the shadows of a streetlight, his hood pulled up tight over his face. I barely saw his eyes. He didn't say much, just nodded as he got in and mumbled the address. It wasn't far, so I didn't think much of it, but looking back, I should have known something was wrong. The way the air felt heavier when he got in, the way he just sat there in complete silence, like he was watching me. I've never been one to scare easily, but that night, I should have listened to my gut. As we drove, the rain hitting the windshield was the only sound in the car. It was like the storm was trying to warn me, but I just kept driving, eyes on the road. Then out of nowhere, he started asking questions. Personal questions, the kind you don't ask a stranger. "How's your family doing, Tom?" His voice was low, calm, like he already knew the answer. I almost swerved the car. "How do you know my name?" I asked, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. He ignored my question and just kept talking. "Your wife, she's been having a hard time lately, hasn't she? And your son? Well, let's just say he's been getting into trouble, huh?" I felt my blood run cold. I hadn't told anyone about the problems at home. How did he know? I looked at him through the rearview mirror, but his face was still hidden in that hood. I wanted to stop the car, throw him out, but something kept me going. It was like I was trapped in that car with him, unable to escape. We were almost at the address he gave me, and I could feel my heart pounding harder with every second. The rain outside only seemed to get louder, like the whole world was closing in. That's when he spoke again. This time slower, almost like he was savoring every word. "I think it's time I show you something, Tom." Before I could say anything, he reached up and pulled down his hood. My foot slammed on the brakes as I stared at him in the rearview mirror. He had no face, just smooth, blank skin where his eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I wanted to run, but I was frozen in place. My hands, still gripping the wheel, started to tingle. I looked down in horror as they began to fade, like smoke blowing away in the wind. It wasn't just my hands, my whole body was disappearing. I was vanishing just like that man in the back seat. In that moment of panic, a strange thought crossed my mind. Life is fragile. You never know when something like this might happen. Maybe if you're watching this right now, you should subscribe to the channel. Who knows? It could be your last chance. My mind was racing, but my body was almost completely gone. My legs, my arms, everything was fading into nothing. I tried one last time to scream, to do something, anything, but I was powerless. The man, or whatever he was, just sat there, expressionless, as I disappeared before his eyes. I blinked, and then I was gone. The rain kept pouring, the city kept moving, but the cab was empty now, just like it had never been there. The passenger without a face? I don't know where he went or what he wanted, but if you ever find yourself driving on a rainy night, picking up a passenger who knows too much about your life, just drive away. Trust me, you don't want to know what happens when they take off the hood. If I had known what was waiting for me that night, I would have taken a different route. But some things, no matter how much you try to avoid them, are meant to happen. That's how I ended up face to face with something I can't explain. And I swear, even now, I feel like I'm being watched. Hi, my name is Michael, and I'm a taxi driver here in Massachusetts. I've seen my fair share of strange things on the road. Drunks stumbling out of bars, couples fighting, people who won't stop talking about their problems. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened that cold November night. It was late, around 11 p.m., and I was driving on Route 20 just outside of Worcester. The air was freezing, my breath fogging up the windshield as I tried to stay awake. Business had been slow, and I was considering calling it a night when I saw her, a little girl no older than 10 standing alone by the side of the road. She was wearing this old-fashioned dress, the kind you'd see in black and white photos, and her hair was tied back with a ribbon. She wasn't crying or looking scared, just waiting. I slowed down, my instincts screaming at me to keep driving, but I couldn't. What kind of person leaves a child alone on a deserted road? I pulled over, rolled down the window and asked, "Hey, are you okay? Do you need a ride?" She nodded, her voice soft but steady. Can you take me home? It's not far. She gave me an address in an older part of town. I hesitated, but there was no way I was leaving her out there alone. She climbed into the back seat without another word. That's when it started, the feeling that something wasn't right. As we pulled back onto the road, I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She was sitting perfectly still, staring out the window like she'd seen it all before. Where are your parents? I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Shouldn't they be looking for you? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pointed to the radio and said, Can you turn it on? I like music. I reached for the dial and turned it on, but all I got was static. The station I'd been listening to earlier had vanished. Weird. I fiddled with it, trying to find a signal, but she spoke again, cutting through the silence. There used to be a big party on that street, she said, pointing to a row of darkened houses as we passed. People wore the most beautiful clothes, and they danced all night. I glanced at her in the mirror again, confused. A party? When was that? A long time ago, she replied, her tone flat, almost bored. Before the fire. The fire? My grip on the steering wheel tightened. What fire? But she didn't answer. She just kept staring out the window, humming a tune that sounded old. It wasn't just her words that were strange. It was the way she said them, like she wasn't talking about a memory, but something she had seen with her own eyes. I tried to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. Maybe she'd heard these stories from someone else, a grandparent or a teacher. Kids have wild imaginations, right? Still, I couldn't stop thinking about the way her dress didn't seem to fit the times, or how she never once asked me a question back. The further we drove, the quieter the girl became. Her humming stopped, and she just stared out the window, her face illuminated by the faint glow of the streetlights. I couldn't shake the feeling that the temperature in the cab had dropped. My breath wasn't fogging up the windshield anymore. It was fogging up inside the car. Are you warm enough back there? I asked, glancing at her in the mirror. I'm fine, she said, not looking at me. Her voice carried an eerie calmness that sent a shiver down my spine. I forced a smile, trying to act normal. So, what's your favorite kind of music? Do you have a favorite song? She didn't respond right away. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if considering the question. I like the music they played at the ball, she finally said. Do you like old music? Sure, I replied, even though I rarely listen to anything older than 80s rock. What kind of ball are you talking about? The one at my house, she said casually. It was the biggest one in town. Everyone came, but that was a long time ago. A chill crawled up my neck. Your house? You mean the address you gave me? She nodded, and for the first time she met my gaze in the mirror. Her eyes were dark, almost black, and there was something in them, something ancient. I didn't know how else to describe it. Do you believe in ghosts? She asked, her voice so quiet I almost didn't hear her. The question hit me like a slap. Ghosts? I don't know, I said, laughing nervously. Why do you ask? No reason, she replied, turning her attention back to the window. Just curious. I tried to focus on the road, but my mind was racing. The way she talked, the way she looked, it was all wrong. I thought about pulling over, maybe calling the cops or social services, but something told me that wouldn't help. And then, the radio crackled to life. It wasn't music. It was a voice, faint and distorted, whispering words I couldn't understand. I reached to turn it off, but the knob wouldn't budge. My heart was pounding now, my hands slick on the steering wheel. Do you hear that? I asked, my voice shaking. Hear what? She said, as calm as ever. I glanced in the mirror again, but she was staring out the window as if nothing unusual was happening. The static grew louder, the whispers turning into a low hum that filled the car. I gritted my teeth and yanked the volume knob until the radio finally went silent. That's better, the girl said, her lips curling into a small smile. I didn't respond. My instincts were screaming at me to turn the car around, but I couldn't. Not yet. I had to see this through. The address she'd given me was on the outskirts of town, down a winding road lined with bare trees. The houses became fewer and farther between until there were none at all, just empty fields and shadows that seemed to stretch forever. Finally, I saw it. The house was massive, or at least it had been at one time. Now it was a crumbling shell of its former self, its windows shattered and its roof caved in. Weeds grew wild around the front steps and the paint had peeled away entirely, leaving the wood beneath gray and weathered. "This is it," the girl said, her voice breaking the heavy silence. I parked the car and turned to face her, my heart thudding in my chest. "Are you sure this is the right place? It doesn't look like anyone's lived here for years." "It's the right place," she said firmly. I hesitated, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. "Do you want me to walk you to the door?" She shook her head. "No, thank you, I can go alone." She reached for the door handle, and I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. But then she froze. "Actually," she said, turning to me with that same unsettling calmness, "can you wait here? Just for a little while?" "Sure," I said, though every fiber of my being was telling me to drive away and never look back. She smiled, an eerie, almost knowing smile, and opened the door. The cold night air rushed in, and for a moment I thought I saw something move in the shadows beyond the house. But before I could be sure, she stepped out and disappeared into the darkness. I waited, the minutes stretching into what felt like hours. The house loomed ahead of me, its broken windows like hollow eyes staring into my soul. I kept telling myself I should leave, that I didn't owe this girl anything, but I couldn't. Something was keeping me there, something I couldn't explain. And then I realized something that made my blood run cold. The rear door of the taxi was still open. I spun around, my heart hammering, but the back seat was empty. She was gone. I stepped out of the car, my breath visible in the freezing air, and called out, "Hello? Are you okay?" No response, just the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. I walked toward the house, every step feeling heavier than the last. The front door was hanging off its hinges and I could see inside, broken furniture, torn wallpaper, and a thick layer of dust covering everything. "Hello?" I called again, my voice echoing in the empty space. And that's when I saw it, a picture frame lying on the floor, its glass cracked. I picked it up, brushing away the dust, and my blood turned to ice. It was a photograph of a group of people, all dressed in old-fashioned clothes. In the center of the group was the girl, the same girl who had been in my taxi. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. How was this possible? The photo looked like it was taken 100 years ago. As I turned to leave, a sound stopped me in my tracks, a soft, childlike giggle coming from somewhere deep inside the house. The giggle sent a chill down my spine, freezing me in place. It echoed through the empty house, faint but unmistakable. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. Slowly, I turned toward the sound, my breath shallow and ragged. "Is someone there?" I called out, my voice trembling. No answer, just silence, thick and oppressive, like the house itself was holding its breath. I clutched the photograph tighter, the edges of the cracked frame digging into my hands. My eyes darted around the room, landing on a staircase that disappeared into darkness. The giggle came again, this time softer, like it was teasing me. I shouldn't have gone upstairs, but something, curiosity, fear, maybe even the girl's eerie calmness, pushed me forward. The wooden steps creaked under my weight, each one sounding like a warning. At the top, a long hallway stretched out before me, lined with doors that hung open like gaping mouths. The air was colder up there, and the smell of decay was stronger. I stepped forward, my eyes scanning each room, but they were all empty. Until I reached the last door. It was closed, unlike the others, and something about it felt wrong. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob when I heard her voice. Soft, sing-song, and unmistakable. "You shouldn't be here." My heart nearly stopped. "Where are you?" I stammered, gripping the doorknob so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Right here," she replied, and the voice was no longer behind the door. It was right behind me. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. Empty, except for the faint outline of a figure at the far end. It was her, the girl. She was smiling, her head tilted just slightly, the way she had in the cab. "You need to go now," she said, her voice calm, almost kind. "It's not safe for you here." My pulse was hammering, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. "Who are you?" I demanded, though my voice barely rose above a whisper. "What? What are you?" Her smile widened, and for the first time I saw something behind her eyes. Something dark and ancient. Something far older than the girl she appeared to be. "I just wanted to go home," she said simply, "and you brought me." Before I could say anything, the house began to shake. The walls groaned, the floor buckled, and a deafening roar filled the air. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the photograph, and turned to run. The stairs seemed to stretch forever, but somehow I made it back to the front door. I burst outside, gasping for air, and turned to look back at the house. It was still shaking, its windows glowing faintly with an unnatural light. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The house fell silent, the glow fading, and the world felt still again. I scrambled back to the taxi, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. I didn't look back until I was a mile down the road. When I finally did, the house was gone. There was nothing but an empty field where it had stood. But the nightmare wasn't over. As I pulled onto the main road, something in the rearview mirror caught my eye. My heart dropped. She was there, sitting in the back seat, her face calm, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Thank you for the ride," she said, her voice soft and sweet, like nothing had happened. I slammed the brakes and spun around, but the back seat was empty. The last thing I remember before speeding away was her laugh, soft, childlike, and echoing in my ears. My name's Will, I'm 35, and I've been driving a taxi for over 10 years. Now I've seen some weird things on these streets, but nothing comes close to what I'm about to tell you. This isn't just another late-night story to spook you. This one's real. And by the time I realized what was happening, I was standing alone in the middle of a cemetery. It all started on a regular night. I was driving my usual route, hoping for one last fare before heading home. The streets were quiet, almost too quiet. Then out of nowhere, my radio crackled. At first I thought it was static, but then I heard a voice, soft, almost a whisper, asking for a ride. They gave me a location, a spot on a road just outside of town. Weird thing is, I hadn't picked up any calls through the app, and the voice didn't sound like a dispatcher. I hesitated for a second. Something felt off, but curiosity got the better of me. One last fare, I told myself, then I'm done for the night. I took a deep breath, turned the car around, and headed for the deserted road. When I pulled up to the spot, there she was, a woman standing alone by the side of the road. She was dressed in black, with a long veil covering her face. The air around her felt colder, heavier, like the night itself was holding its breath. I rolled down my window and asked, "Need a ride?" She didn't say a word, just nodded and slipped into the back seat. The silence was thick, and for some reason I couldn't bring myself to ask where she was going. She simply pointed straight ahead. So, I drove. The longer we went down that empty road, the stranger it felt. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, trying to get a look at her face, but that veil, it was like a barrier separating her from the world. I tried to make small talk, but she didn't respond. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the tires against the pavement. It was as if we were the only two people left in the world driving into some unknown place. We'd been driving for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only about 20 minutes. The further we went, the more desolate the surroundings became. No streetlights, no houses, just a stretch of road that seemed to go on forever. Then I saw it. Out of the fog and darkness, an old, crumbling cemetery appeared, tucked away in the middle of nowhere. It looked ancient, like it had been forgotten by time. I pulled the car to a stop at the entrance, and that's when it hit me. This was her destination. My heart started racing, and every instinct in me screamed to turn around and leave. But before I could say anything, she quietly opened the door and stepped out. I watched as she walked slowly toward the gravestones, her figure almost blending into the mist. The whole scene felt like something out of a nightmare. I couldn't explain why, but I was drawn to follow her. So, I got out of the car, my feet moving as if they had a mind of their own. As I approached her, she stopped in front of a tombstone, staring down at it. My breath caught in my throat as I read the name carved into the stone. It was her name. This was her grave. I stood there, frozen, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. The woman, who had just been in my car, was dead. I looked up at her, but she didn't move. She just stood there, still as a statue, with that veil still covering her face. Then, in the blink of an eye, she was gone, disappeared into the mist as if she had never been there. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I turned back toward the car, but it was like the whole world had shifted. The silence was deafening. I was standing alone in the middle of that cemetery, with no sign of the woman or how I even got there. I stumbled back to the car, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. What just happened? I whispered to myself, still trying to make sense of it all. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't just some unlucky driver who picked up a strange fare. I had just given a ride to someone who was already dead. If this story gives you chills, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. I've got plenty more stories like this. And trust me, it only gets darker from here. With trembling hands, I started the engine and drove away from that cemetery, leaving behind a night I would never forget. Some fares you just don't want to take.